Welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today on this exciting journey into the world of rare and valuable coins where history, small minting mistakes, and the fascination of collectors all come together to create something extraordinary. And today we are diving deep into the story of the 1960 1-cent coin from the United States that in certain conditions, and with very specific errors and varieties, can be worth up to $900,000, a staggering number for a coin with a face value of just 1 cent, yet this is what makes coin collecting so intriguing, because an ordinary-looking penny in your pocket change might actually hide a fortune if you know what to look for, so let us unravel every detail of this incredible coin. Starting with the fact that the 1960 penny was struck at the Denver Mint during a time when the United States Mint was struggling to keep up with huge demand for circulating coins, and because of the massive production numbers, the chances of errors and variations increased dramatically, making 1960 a famous year in the numismatic world, especially because of the well-known large date and small date varieties that collectors still chase passionately today, and when these varieties combine with minting errors such as double dies, repunched mint marks, off-center strikes, clipped planchets, broad strikes, or even transitional errors, suddenly the coin jumps from being just a common cent into the realm of highly valuable rarities that can bring in hundreds of thousands of dollars at major auctions, and in the case of the 1960 penny the story gets even more exciting, because experts have identified multiple varieties where the date itself was punched into the dies differently, giving us the small date 1960 penny and the large date 1960 penny, and while both are collectible in their own right, the small date tends to attract more attention due to its relative scarcity, especially in high mint state condition. And when errors overlay this scarcity, the values explode beyond imagination. For example, if a 1960 small date penny is found with a double die obverse where the date, lettering, or Lincoln's profile shows doubling under magnification, collectors are willing to pay staggering sums, sometimes into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, because not only are such pieces rare, but they also tell the story of how minting technology was imperfect, how dies were hand-prepared, and how even a minor misalignment could create something unique that no other coin would exactly replicate. And this uniqueness is what collectors crave, because in a hobby where millions of coins exist, rarity and uniqueness are the ultimate drivers of value, and that is exactly why the 1960 penny in the right form can fetch $900,000. Now let us break down the possibilities in more detail. Imagine a coin struck off-center where Lincoln's portrait is missing part of his head, or the rim is incomplete, yet the date and mint mark remain clearly visible. Collectors call this a dramatic off-center strike, and such coins already bring in strong values. But if the coin is also a small date variety, suddenly we have a double rarity. And if that same coin is in uncirculated or proof-like condition, the value skyrockets. Then consider repunched mint marks. A very common error in the mid-20th century when mint marks were applied by hand to each die. Sometimes the punch would slip or strike twice, creating what we now call RPMs, repunched mint marks, and on a 1960 penny these are particularly sought after, especially when the D mint mark is visible in two distinct positions or shows a shadow-like doubling effect, and when paired with the small date, the desirability multiplies, pushing values far higher. Now add to this the allure of double die reverses, where the lettering on the back such as 1 cent or E pluribus unum shows clear doubling, giving the coin an unmistakable appearance under a loupe, and once again if such doubling is found on a 1960 penny, particularly a small date, collectors will compete fiercely at auctions, driving the price into 6 or even 7 figures. This is not speculation but proven by records, as similar double-die coins from other years like the 1955 or 1972 Lincoln cents have already sold for enormous sums. So imagine the frenzy when a rare double-die 1960 penny surfaces. And beyond these dramatic errors there are also transitional and planchet errors. Sometimes pennies were struck on planchets meant for dimes or foreign coins, resulting in coins that are lighter or smaller in diameter, and these oddities are so rare that whenever they appear, they instantly become headline news in the coin world, making the owners extremely wealthy. And yes, the 1960 penny is known to exist with such striking mistakes. further confirming why its maximum value is estimated around $900,000. But let us also talk about condition, because even the rarest error or variety loses much of its value if the coin is heavily circulated, scratched, or corroded. Collectors prize coins in mint state condition, those that have survived decades without wear, often protected in rolls, bags, or forgotten hoards, and it is these pristine examples combined with dramatic errors that create the record-breaking values. So when you hear about a 1960 penny selling for close to $1 million, it is not just because of the error, but because the coin was also in superb condition, graded by professional services like PCGS or NGC as MS67 or higher, and in the numismatic market, such grades make a huge difference. A coin graded MS63 might be worth thousands, while the exact same coin graded MS67 could be worth hundreds of thousands, simply because of the rarity of perfection. And now you can understand how the magic number of $900,000 becomes realistic, because rarity plus condition plus demand equals value, and the demand for Lincoln cents is one of the strongest in all of coin collecting, spanning millions of collectors across the world who have grown up with these coins in their pockets, who feel nostalgia, and who recognize the beauty of Victor David Brenner's design with Lincoln's portrait on the obverse and the simple wheat ears or memorial reverse depending on the year. And this emotional connection further fuels the passion to own rare varieties, driving auction prices ever higher. And so the 1960 penny is not just a small piece of copper, but a tangible link to American history, a reflection of minting technology, human error, and collector enthusiasm all rolled into one, making it worthy of headlines and extraordinary valuations. And as we explore more stories of rare pennies, we see this pattern repeating. But none quite capture the imagination like the 1960 with its large and small date varieties, double dies, repunched mint marks, off center strikes, transitional planchets, and high-grade survivals, all of which combine to create a coin that can truly be worth up to $900,000. And for everyone watching, this is the key takeaway: never overlook even the most ordinary-looking penny, because history has shown that treasures hide in plain sight, and with knowledge, patience, and a little luck, you might just discover the next legendary coin that turns pocket change into a life-changing fortune. And so we conclude this deep dive into the 1960 penny. But the fascination with rare coins continues, because every year and every mint has its own story of errors and varieties, and the thrill of discovery is what keeps collectors searching tirelessly through rolls, bags, and collections, always hoping to find that one extraordinary piece. And maybe next time it will be you holding a penny worth nearly $1 million, proving once again that small things can carry the greatest value. Next, 1965 1-cent USA coin, another fascinating exploration of the hidden treasures in the world of coin collecting, where today we turn our focus to a truly captivating piece that has stunned collectors, dealers, and historians alike, the 1965 1-cent United States coin. A coin that under normal circumstances might seem like just another ordinary penny, but under certain rare conditions of errors, varieties, and extraordinary survival quality has reached astonishing valuations, with some examples being considered worth as much as $900,000, a number that seems impossible for a coin with such a humble face value, yet becomes entirely logical once we dive deep into the history, production methods, minting circumstances, and collector demand surrounding this special year. And as we begin, let us set the scene in the mid-1960s, when the United States Mint was undergoing tremendous challenges, because 1965 was the year following the great coinage crisis of 1964, when the public hoarded silver coins, fearing a removal of precious metal content, leading to severe shortages of coins in circulation, and in response, the Mint had to ramp up production across all denominations, including the penny, while also transitioning in its production methods. And one of the most significant decisions that affected the 1965 cent was that no mint marks were used on coins between 1965 and 1967, a deliberate move by the Mint to discourage collectors from hoarding coins based solely on mint mark differences. So the 1965 1-cent coin exists without any mint marks. All were struck at Philadelphia, even though Denver and San Francisco were still operational, and this already makes the year unusual. But beyond this policy decision, the sheer scale of production and the hurried pace of striking created conditions ripe for errors, varieties, and anomalies that today transform common-looking cents into pieces worth life-changing sums. Now imagine the types of errors possible. We are talking about dramatic double dies where Lincoln's portrait, the date, or the inscriptions like "I in God We Trust," "Liberty," and the reverse lettering "United States of America" and 1 cent show clear doubling visible even to the naked eye. And such double die coins are always among the most highly prized by collectors because they are unmistakable, historically documented, and often very scarce, making them worth thousands or hundreds of thousands depending on grade. And if you happen to find a 1965 penny with such dramatic doubling in uncirculated mint state condition, you are holding something that could easily cross into the realm of $900,000 at auction. Then there are off-center strikes, a type of mint error where the blank planchet is not properly seated in the press and the dies strike it partially off the design, creating a coin where Lincoln's head might be cut off or part of the design spills into the blank metal space. And the more dramatic the off-center percentage while still retaining a visible date, the more valuable the error. And if such a coin from 1965 survives in pristine condition, it becomes highly desirable. Add to this the possibility of broad strikes where the retaining collar fails and the coin expands wider than normal, giving it an unusual flattened appearance, another type of mistake that collectors eagerly seek. And then consider the ever-popular clipped planchets where part of the coin is missing in a crescent shape because the blank was punched out of the metal sheet overlapping another punch, creating a natural curved clip, and these two command impressive prices. But perhaps the most mind-blowing and valuable category for the 1965 penny involves transitional errors, because 1965 was a year of transition for U.S. coinage as silver was being removed from dimes, quarters, and half dollars. And during such changes sometimes wrong planchets were used, meaning a penny might have been struck on a dime planchet, a foreign coin planchet, or a leftover bronze composition from a prior year. And such transitional errors are vanishingly rare, but when discovered they rock the coin collecting world, instantly leaping into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And in the case of the 1965 penny, there are rumors and confirmed instances of off-metal strikes that make these coins legends in numismatics. But let us not forget about the importance of condition, because even the most spectacular error loses value if the coin is worn, scratched, or damaged. So the true $900,000 examples are those that combine an extraordinary error or variety with immaculate preservation, often graded mint state 67 or higher by professional services like PCGS or NGC. And such coins are beyond rare, often unique. And when they cross the auction block, collectors from all over the world compete to own them, pushing prices to jaw-dropping heights. And to give context, we can compare to other famous error cents, like the 1955 double die, which in top condition has sold for over $100,000, or the 1969 S double die, which has crossed into six-figure sales. So if a 1965 penny with an equally dramatic error, in equally pristine condition, appears, there is no doubt it could reach or surpass $900,000. Because rarity plus demand plus condition equals value, and Lincoln cents in particular enjoy one of the largest collector bases in the world, with millions of people collecting by date, variety, or error, which means the demand for unique pieces is enormous, and it is this collector enthusiasm combined with the inherent scarcity of major 1965 errors that creates the $900,000 possibility. But let us explore some specific varieties reported by specialists. There are stories of double die obverse where Liberty shows strong doubling. There are misaligned die strikes where one side of the coin is shifted, creating thicker rims on one edge. There are even tales of proof like 1965 cents that somehow survived with mirrored surfaces even though the mint did not officially release proof sets that year. And such coins are mysteries that spark the imagination of collectors, because every anomaly in 1965 tells a story of the mint struggling to adapt to a changing economy, a changing metal policy, and immense public demand for coinage. And every story increases the romance and desirability of these coins. And beyond the technical side, we must also understand the psychology of collectors, because when you own a $900,000 penny, you do not just own metal, you own history, You own a conversation piece that connects you to the 1960s, to the mint workers who accidentally created it, to the generations of collectors who dreamed of finding it, and to the market that now values rarity above all else, making it not only a treasure but an investment. And this is why, even though millions of 1965 pennies exist, only a tiny handful with dramatic mistakes are considered priceless, and every year treasure hunters continue to search through old jars, rolls, and collections hoping to find that one coin that changes their life. And so the story of the 1965 1-cent coin is both cautionary and inspiring. Cautionary because most examples are worth face value only, but inspiring because the possibility remains that one extraordinary coin out there could be worth $900,000, and maybe, just maybe, it is sitting unnoticed in someone's drawer or piggy bank, waiting to be discovered. And that is the magic of coin collecting, the blend of history, chance, error, survival, and human passion that transforms the smallest objects into priceless treasures. So as we close this journey into the 1965 penny, remember to look closely at your coins, learn about the varieties, study the errors, and never underestimate the power of knowledge, because the next legendary discovery might be yours. And the humble penny in your hand might actually be the key to a fortune. Next, 1979 1-cent USA coin, another incredible deep dive into the world of valuable and rare coins, where we continue our fascinating journey through history, minting technology, collector psychology, and the power of small minting mistakes that transform ordinary-looking cents into treasures worth life-changing sums of money. And today's focus is on the 1979 1-cent coin of the United States. A coin that in everyday circulation is often overlooked as just another Lincoln Memorial cent, but in certain rare conditions of minting errors, transitional compositions, and extraordinary preservation has been valued at an astonishing $700,000, a figure that seems impossible for something worth only a cent at face value, but makes perfect sense once you understand how rarity, error, variety, and demand all come together to elevate it into numismatic legend. And so, to give you the full picture, we must go back to the historical context of 1979, a year when the United States was preparing for important shifts in its coinage, including the transition to the new Susan B. Anthony dollar, meaning the mint was under enormous pressure to produce billions of coins across all denominations while still experimenting with new technologies, new designs, and new allies. And this environment always increases the likelihood of minting errors, because when production speeds up, quality control often struggles to keep up. So within the massive runs of 1979 Lincoln cents there appeared a handful of extraordinary mistakes that today rank among the most valuable of all Lincoln Memorial cents. But before we jump into those errors, let's remind ourselves of the basics. The 1979 Lincoln cent was part of the Memorial Reverse series that had started in 1959 to honor the 150th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, designed by Frank Gasparo, featuring the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse and Victor David Brenner's iconic portrait of Lincoln on the obverse, and struck primarily in a bronze alloy of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc. But here is where the intrigue begins, because during this period the mint was already considering reducing the copper content of pennies due to rising metal costs, eventually leading to the 1982 transition to copper-plated zinc planchets. And so in the late 1970s and early 1980s experimentation was happening, test strikes were being made, and transitional errors became a real possibility, meaning that some 1979 cents could have been struck on wrong planchets or experimental compositions, instantly creating rarities worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now add to this the classic minting errors like double dies, off-center strikes, clipped planchets, broad strikes, die cracks, cuds, misaligned dies, repunched mint marks, and even proof-like strikes escaping circulation, and suddenly you have a recipe for extreme value. So let us break this down. One of the most dramatic types of errors and most desirable among collectors is the doubled die, where the die itself was impressed twice out of alignment during the hubbing process, resulting in visible doubling on the coin. And for 1979 Lincoln cents, specialists have identified examples of doubling on Liberty, the date, and I in God we trust. And when these are strong and clear, especially in uncirculated condition, collectors are willing to pay extraordinary sums. because the combination of dramatic doubling and the year's significance makes them highly prized. And if such a coin is found in near-perfect mint state condition graded MS67 or above, the price can leap into the hundreds of thousands, and it is not unreasonable to estimate $700,000 for the finest known example. Then we have off-center strikes, where the coin is struck outside of proper alignment so that part of the design is missing, often leaving a crescent of blank planchet visible, and the more off-center the strike, up to around 70% while still retaining the full date, the more valuable the coin, and 1979 off-center pennies with extreme misalignments can sell for thousands, but when combined with perfect condition and a dramatic percentage, their values soar. Now consider the repunched mint mark varieties, because in 1979 mint marks were still applied manually to the dies at Denver and San Francisco, creating the possibility of visible overlapping punches. So if you find a 1979 D with a strong RPM where the D appears doubled, tripled, or punched at an angle, that coin is highly collectible, especially in mint state, and while most RPMs might sell for modest premiums, the rarest and strongest varieties in superb condition could reach extraordinary prices if demand drives bidding wars. And then we have transitional errors, which in my opinion are the most likely pathway for a $700,000 valuation. Because imagine a 1979 penny struck on a 40% silver planchet intended for a special strike, or struck on a leftover experimental planchet from the testing of copper-plated zinc coins, or even struck on a dime planchet. These off-metal or transitional errors are incredibly rare and often unique, making them the crown jewels of coin collecting, and history shows us that whenever one of these unique pieces comes to auction, the results are staggering, because collectors know that rarity drives value more than anything else. And a one-of-a-kind 1979 transitional penny could easily be valued at $700,000 or more, especially if it is authenticated and graded by PCGS or NGC at a very high level. Then there are die cracks and cuds, where parts of the die break and leave raised blobs or missing portions of design on the coin, and while minor die cracks are common, large dramatic cuds covering portions of the rim and design can become very collectible, and in the context of 1979 pennies, these errors in pristine condition could attract serious interest, further driving up the rarest examples. But what truly makes the story powerful is not just the technical details but the psychology of collectors, because Lincoln cents are one of the most collected series in all of numismatics. Millions of people started coin collecting by pulling Lincoln cents from circulation, and this nostalgic bond makes demand incredibly strong. So when a dramatic error or unique transitional coin surfaces, the bidding wars become fierce, driving values to unimaginable levels, and that is why the 1979 cent in rare error forms can realistically achieve $700,000, because the demand is global and the supply is vanishingly small. And to understand how condition affects this, remember that a coin graded MS63 might be worth a few thousand, but the same coin in MS67 could be worth hundreds of thousands. Because collectors will pay astronomical sums for the finest known example of any variety. So when you combine error rarity with condition rarity, the result is exponential value growth. And this is why the hunt for high-grade errors from 1979 continues. And beyond the technicalities, the story of the 1979 penny also captures the era, reflecting the mint's struggles with inflation, rising metal prices, public demand for coins, and the looming transition of compositions, and every era tells that story, making each one not just a collectible but a piece of history. And so we can conclude that the 1979 penny, under the right circumstances, with the right combination of error, variety, and preservation, can absolutely be worth $700,000, and it stands as a reminder to all collectors and treasure hunters to never overlook even the most ordinary-looking coin, because hidden within your pocket change or an old coin jar could be the discovery of a lifetime, a coin that transforms from 1 cent into a fortune. And perhaps the next legendary piece is waiting for you to uncover it, proving once again that in the world of numismatics, the smallest things can hold the greatest value. Next, 1982 1-cent USA coin, our deep treasure hunt into the world of rare and valuable coins where we uncover the secrets, mistakes, and mysteries that transformed tiny copper discs into life-changing fortunes. And today our spotlight shines on one of the most fascinating years in Lincoln cent history, the famous year of 1982, a year of transition, a year of confusion, a year of change in both composition and design details, a year that produced more varieties than any other Lincoln cent year, and a year that gave rise to one of the most legendary rarities in all of American coinage, the 1982 1 cent that under the right conditions, with the right variety and the right preservation, can be worth an astounding $400,000, a figure that shocks newcomers to coin collecting yet makes perfect sense once you understand the complexity of this pivotal year. Because in 1982 the Mint finally decided to change the penny's composition after years of debate due to the rising cost of copper, and this decision created chaos that produced multiple varieties and incredible rarities. So let us step back and set the scene. Throughout the 1970s, inflation and commodity prices were climbing, and copper became more and more expensive, until by the early 1980s the copper in a penny was worth nearly as much as the coin itself, creating fears that people would begin hoarding pennies or even melting them down for profit. And to solve this problem, the Mint made the historic decision to abandon the traditional bronze composition of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc that had been used for decades and instead shift to a new planchet made of 97.5% zinc with a thin plating of 2.5% copper, dramatically reducing the intrinsic metal cost of the cent. But the change did not happen overnight, and this is the key to the story. Because in 1982 the Mint struck both compositions, copper and zinc, and within both compositions the Mint struck both small date and large date varieties, and at both Philadelphia with no mint mark and Denver with a D mint mark. So when you multiply the variations you get a total of 7 official types of 1982 cents. But here's the kicker. While most of these are common, one extraordinary mistake occurred. The 1982 D small date struck in copper, a coin that should not exist. A coin that experts believe was struck accidentally when leftover copper planchets were used with small date dies at Denver. And because this coin combines all the key elements of rarity, error, and mystery, it has become one of the greatest treasures in U.S. coin collecting, with known examples selling for 6 figures and the finest theoretical examples estimated to reach $400,000. And this is not just hype but grounded in real market behavior. Because collectors have already paid hundreds of thousands for similar transitional rarities like the 1943 copper cent or the 1944 steel cent, so it is entirely realistic that a perfect 1982 D small date copper could sell for $400,000 or more. But before we get carried away, let us carefully examine what makes 1982 so complex and how you can identify these varieties. First, let's understand the small date versus large date difference. The easiest way to tell them apart is to look closely at the number 2 in the date. In the large date variety, the 2 has a taller curved tail, and the overall digits appear bolder and higher, while in the small date the 2 is more delicate, with a thinner curve, and the 8 sits slightly higher relative to the other digits, making the whole date appear more compact, so trained collectors can spot these at a glance. But for beginners it takes practice. And in 1982 both Philadelphia and Denver struck large date and small date coins, but only Philadelphia struck copper small dates intentionally. Denver's small date cents were supposed to be only zinc, yet a few copper planchets slipped through, creating the legendary rarity. And the only way to confirm whether a 1982 cent is copper or zinc is to check the weight. Copper cents weigh about 3.11 grams while zinc cents weigh about 2.5 grams. So if you suspect you have a small date 1982 D, weigh it carefully, and if it tips the scale at 3.11 grams, congratulations. You may have one of the most valuable pennies in existence. And beyond composition and date size, we must also consider the mint mark, because Denver coins carry a D and Philadelphia coins in 1982 had no mint mark, and that distinction creates the possibility of the transitional error existing only at Denver. And this is why the 1982 D small date copper is so legendary. Now let us expand further into the types of errors and varieties beyond the composition, because 1982 was a year when billions of pennies were struck. And the pressure to produce high numbers always leads to mistakes, and these mistakes are what collectors dream of. for example doubled die. Obverse errors where the design elements like Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, or the date show dramatic doubling under magnification, and such doubled dies from other years like 1955 or 1969s have sold for six figures. So if a strong doubled die were to be found on a 1982 copper transitional cent, the value could easily push to $400,000. Then we have repunched mint marks, especially at Denver, where mint marks were still applied by hand to dies in earlier years, but even in 1982. Misalignments or tooling marks could occur, creating interesting RPMs that collectors value highly. Then there are off-center strikes, coins that are not properly aligned during striking, leaving part of the design missing and blank planchet showing, and dramatic off-center strikes with full dates can sell for thousands, and if combined with the transitional copper composition, their value could multiply. Then there are broad strikes, where the coin expands outside the collar and becomes oversized, die cracks and cuts where parts of the die break off leaving raised or missing sections on the coin, and even clipped planchets where part of the blank is missing creating a crescent-shaped cut, and each of these errors is collectible. But in 1982 with the added confusion of compositions and date sizes they become even more special, and let us not forget proof-like or experimental strikes. Because while official proof coins were not minted for circulation in 1982, some planchets may have been polished or struck under unusual conditions creating coins with mirrored surfaces, and such anomalies can add tremendous collector interest. Now let us dive into the psychology and economics of why collectors will pay $400,000 for one of these pennies. Coin collecting is not just a hobby but also a competitive pursuit where rarity, history, and condition drive demand. And the Lincoln Cent series is the most widely collected coin series in America. Millions of people have folders and albums filled with cents dating back to 1909, and completing the set is a dream for many. But when a coin is so rare that only a handful exist, it creates an almost mythical status, and wealthy collectors will bid huge sums to acquire it, not just for investment but for prestige. And because demand is global and supply is tiny, prices soar, and condition amplifies this further. Because the grading scale from circulated to mint state to gem mint state can mean the difference between a coin worth a few thousand and a coin worth hundreds of thousands. So when a transitional era like the 1982 D small date copper appears in pristine condition, it represents not just a rarity but the best possible example of that rarity, and collectors will stop at nothing to own it, which is why experts estimate its value at $400,000. And to give context, let's compare with the 1943 copper cent, another transitional rarity struck when the mint switched to steel for wartime but a few copper planchets slipped through. Those coins have sold for over $1 million at auction, proving the market's appetite for transitional rarities is huge. So the 1982 transitional fits perfectly into that tradition, and in some ways is even more intriguing because it involves both composition and design varieties, making it a double anomaly. And beyond the money there is the romance of discovery, the dream that one day while searching through a jar of pennies you could find one of these treasures. And countless collectors continue to search, weighing coins, studying date shapes, and hoping for that life-changing moment. And this is what makes coin collecting magical, the possibility that a simple penny could transform into a fortune, a possibility embodied perfectly by the 1982 1 cent worth $400,000. And so as we step back and reflect on this story we see how history, economy, minting mistakes, and human passion all combine to create extraordinary value out of ordinary objects. And the lesson is clear: never overlook your change, always check your coins, because you never know when you might be holding a fortune in your hands.